let's talk a little bit about boundaries. What are boundaries? So boundaries are lines that you put in place that you are not going to cross, okay? And you're not going to cross them because those boundaries are things that keep you safe. So let's talk about, say for instance, when we're children, our parents should have, hopefully, taught us very strong boundaries, okay? Boundaries that, say like the no pants rule. We think, well, okay, should we allow anybody to touch us on where our pants are when we're children, And the answer is no, because that's a strong boundary, The boundary is put in place to protect the kids because they need to understand that their privates, their physical boundaries are just for them, okay? Just for them, and that we don't allow people to cross those boundaries, because if we do, then we get hurt, okay? So that's a very, very simple kind of understanding, construct of what a boundary is. And, I think people kind of understand it when they're children, they think, okay, there's this boundary is keeping me safe, certain boundaries like, don't run with scissors, the the no touch pants rule, thinking about, if somebody comes up to you in a white van and says, hey little girl, do you want to come and see my kittens and get some sweeties? Your immediate response would probably be no. Because you have a boundary that's put in place. Now the problem is that as we get older, people kind of lose the understanding that self-care includes, our emotions and the way that we care about ourselves, the way that we look after ourselves from the interior. It's not just the exterior. It's not just about physically protecting you. It's about mentally protecting you. And if you're somebody who has been in some way, shape or form abused by their parents, or by somebody, you will have had your boundaries broken down, which, leads us to big consequences for our mental health and our mental stability. And because we've been taught that having boundaries is a bad thing, in effect. If you've got a covert narcissist in your life who is using you as a resource, they like it when you don't have emotional boundaries in place. If you're a woman who has been, attacked, abused, raped, sexually, physically, mentally, normally your abuser will have done all that they can to ensure that you are and have dismantled all of your boundaries. And so, particularly if you've had this when you're a child, you've been taught that having boundaries is bad and that you shouldn't have boundaries. Because, if you put a boundary up between you and your abuser, they get angry. They get angry at you. And so, often we're taught, not to have those boundaries in place. Now, if there's somebody who is in your life who's angry that you're putting boundaries up between you and them, it's normally because they're abusing you and that you're cutting off their supply, and they don't like that, they don't like that. And so, when I talk with my clients, and we start to put boundaries in place, and they say, oh, well, this person's angry at me, they don't like that I'm behaving differently. They start to, say things like, oh, you've changed, or what's changed? Why can't we get back to the way things were? And it's because they don't like the fact that you're not acting as their supply anymore. Or they don't like the fact that you're putting a boundary in place so they can't continue to abuse you. It's supposed to be really frustrating if you're a narcissist, If you're a narcissist and you're using somebody as a supply, and then your supply gets cut off, it's going to be pretty frustrating for the narcissist. However, for the person, for the poor person who is, trying to live their life without being abused, and they're putting those boundaries in place, you know, it's really positive. It's a very positive step, and it will actually, you know, stop putting themselves in the situation of being abused. Now, often, speaking as a woman, often women, as we've grown up, we've been taught that, you know, we to be nice, we have to basically push our boundaries all the time, you know, which isn't true. You know, to be a nice woman, you don't have to push your boundaries. You don't have to allow people to do stuff to you that you don't want done. And I think, unfortunately, as a woman, there is this this rhetoric that, you know, nice girls basically don't have boundaries, that they, you know, that, you know, I think when we start with children and we say to them, you know, you have to share, you know, why does a child have to share if they don't want to? You know, why does a child have to share their toys if they don't want to? And then we say to them, well, it's nice to share. Okay, well, one minute we're telling them that it's nice to share and that they should share something that they don't want to. And then when they turn up to be teenagers, we're saying, no, you shouldn't have sex with everybody, you should close your legs, you shouldn't share, that's your private thing. And it's like the mixed messages are very confusing. And for, you know, girls turning into women, you know, the idea of being nice, being a nice girl, you know, and not being confrontational and all that bollocks, is actually quite deeply rooted, and it's quite difficult to kind of go between these two ideologies of being somebody one minute who's being told to share regardless of whether we want to, you know, and then the next minute being told that we're not supposed to share and that we're supposed to be forceful and say no and stuff. And it's like, you know, that education doesn't start in adulthood. It's too late then, you know, to start talking to teenage girls and being like, you know, you're supposed to be sharing, you know, you're supposed to be not sharing these things, you know. It's too late by then. And so we get a lot of girls that are attempting to set boundaries far too late in life because they haven't been taught it. You know, and even worse, what's even worse is if you are, you know, a child of an abusive parent who hasn't instilled these sort of strong boundaries between you and them. Then, you know, I was talking to a client last night and he has in effect become a server for his mother. You know, she has dissolved boundaries between him and her so that he can become he can be her server, so he can serve her needs, you know, and what does that leave for him? You know, what does that lead for him? Because he has gone into the process of, you know, feeling that to be a good person, he has to, you know, be a server, you know, and somebody who serves other people, you know, their boundaries are completely and utterly dissolved, you know. They don't have boundaries because the person who is using them as a source, whether it's a narcissistic source or whatever, you know, they've taught them that not to have boundaries is the way forward, you know. And so they find it quite difficult, and this often plays itself out. You know, you see people repeating the relationships that they had with their parents, with their friends and with their girlfriends and spouses and boyfriends and whatever, husbands, wives. And they're doomed to repeat it because what they need to do is heal it. But there's huge amounts of people that are not even aware that they've got trauma. You know, they think that everything's fine. They don't even recognise that, in effect, what they're doing is dating their mother or father over and over and over and over. And actually, it's not a very nice realisation, you know. It feels a bit gross, like, you know, when you realise that you've been doing this habit over and over, because you're like, fuck, how did I not notice? How did I keep doing that, you know, repeating the cycle? But you know, the universe, your psyche, your subconscious, whatever you want to call it, is kind enough to keep giving you the the same pattern over and over and over until you learn the lesson, you know, and you will be doomed to repeat it. You will keep repeating the cycle until you learn to stop. You know, I look a bit mental right now. Hopefully it'll all come together, don't I? But yeah, I mean, it's difficult because a lot of people don't want to recognize that, you know, that they're living, you know, a detrimental cycle. They don't want to recognize that they are doing this stuff over and over and over again, and that they haven't really learned anything since they were a child. You know, it's quite a confronting experience to realize that you're just doing the same relationships over and over, and you've tricked yourself into thinking that, you know, Jacob, who turned into Simon, who turned into, you know, Gerald, you know, that these are different people. And yeah, in the physical, they're different people, but on a soul contract level, they're just the same person over and over and over. And whose soul is it that this person kind of contains? Well, you know, it is your mother or your father or your abuser, you know, and that's the fact, you know, that's the truth of it, really, is that you need to recognize that you are repeating this cycle over and over and over. And when you recognize it, you can break it. So how do we break these cycles? How do we stop going over and over and over again with the same relationship? Well, you know, one of the first things that we need to do is put very strong boundaries in place. And when you start to put boundaries in place, you stop allowing people to treat you in a way that you don't want to be treated. You know, and unfortunately, if you are somebody who's been taught that, you know, to be nice, we have to, you know, accept whatever treatment people want to give us, you know, and that's us being nice. Well, you know, that's not really the truth of the matter, you know. The truth of the matter is that, you know, good people in our lives wouldn't want to harm us. You know, and if you've got people in your lives that do want to harm you, and they don't like you having boundaries in place, you have to question why that is. Because most of the time, those are people who are abusing you in some way, shape or form. You know? Which is hard. That's a hard one to recognise, particularly if, you know, that person is somebody that is supposed to protect you. This is a terrible angle. It looked much better when I didn't have my glasses on. You know. So, you know, it's a tough one. It is a tough one because, you know, particularly if you're somebody who's been taught as a child not to put boundaries in place. You know, and that you are there for, you know, in effect, your parents' pleasure, you know, to serve them in whatever this way they see fit. And that, you know, that could be sexually, it could be mentally, it could be emotionally, you know, whatever it is. And then this poor kid has got to do the healing and start to put boundaries in place with people in their life, which is really, really difficult, particularly if it's a parent. You know, my client I was talking to last night, you know, his mother has used him in effect almost as a husband, almost as a spouse, you know. Too much enmeshment, way too much oversharing, you know, of just inappropriateness. You know, nothing sexual, but people think like, oh, crossing that physical boundary is the worst thing, and it's like, no, like mental abuse is just as bad. Daily mental abuse is just as bad as, you know, being physically beaten. It's a different type of abuse, but it's still abuse. So how do we set boundaries? You know, what do we do? Well, we need to think about what we're prepared to do, okay? If you're setting a boundary, particularly with a narcissist, you need to make sure that you stick to that, okay? You're going to make sure that you stick to the boundaries that you put in place, because they will push it. They will push it and push it and push it in a hope that, that you will cave. And you can't cave. You can't, because as soon as they see weakness in you, they'll realise that there's a chink in your armour and they can come back in through that way. Narcissists are amazing at roping people back in. They are professional manipulators. And you need to be aware of that if you're dealing with a narcissist. If you're dealing with an abusive parent, they know you inside out, and so they know how they can get inside your head, and it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible that people have got parents like this, but I mean, most of it isn't that most of this is unconscious. Most of the things that these people do, that these parents do, they're not even really aware of it themselves, which is sad. Because it's that hurting people. They go around damaging people, and they don't even realise they're doing it. And then they'll play the victim, and they'll make you out to be the bad person. And so, when you're putting these boundaries in place, you've really got to learn to disconnect, completely disconnect from the outcome, and do the self-care work that your self-esteem is so strong that you know who you are, and if they go around saying shit about you, it doesn't really matter, because your self-esteem is strong, and that's that. If you're your steady source of self-esteem, then external validation doesn't really matter so much. That's the problem with the narcissist, is that they don't have a steady stream of self-esteem. So they use other people for it, But it's so abusive. And it's unnecessary, And people who enable this, if you think, it's not their fault, they've been taught this by their parents or whatever, or a load of bollocks about, enabling somebody. Well, what you're doing there really is taking away the opportunity for that person to be able to deal with their shit. If they've got a constant supply, and people allow them to mistreat them, they don't have to fix themselves. They don't have to recognize their faults or make any changes. So how are you helping them? Well, you're not, is the long and short. And you're also suffering, If you don't put these strong boundaries in place, you're also suffering. And you're enabling their bad behaviours to continue. And what for? What for? This fake ideology that you're being nice. This fake ideology that you're being nice, when you're not really being nice. You're not really being nice, are you? It's fake niceness. It's martyrdom in effect. And people say, oh, I can't. And I get, trust me, I get it. I get how difficult it is to put boundaries in place. I do. I totally do. It's taken me to the age that I am now to be able to put boundaries in place and to start to put boundaries in place with certain people. And no, they won't like it. Of course they won't like it. Particularly not if they've had narcissistic supply from you for a while. But it's so important, you know. It's so important for you to have strong boundaries, because these boundaries protect you. And so, you know, think about what you're willing to do for this person and what you're not willing to do. You know, where are you willing to go with this? Whatever, with your boundaries. You know, are you willing to, I don't know, are you willing to do all that they want you to do? Are you willing to do some of the things that you're willing to do? You know, are you willing to spend hours for them, or are you willing to spend 15 minutes? Are you wanting to go and spend time with that person and see them, or are you not? You know, is it that, you know, the boundary that you have to put in place with somebody is a complete no contact zone with that person? Is it that, you know, that you can allow, that you can speak to them through, you know, WhatsApp or text or something, or through letters or emails, but you can't talk to them in person because, you know, the more that contact they have with you, the more abusive they are of you, you know? So you need to question about what you can actually put in place, and what boundary you're willing to keep, you know? And that boundary will be different for different people, and the boundary will be different depending on who you're trying to put a boundary in place with. You know, if you've got somebody who's toxic and abusive, really the best boundary that you can put in place with that person, if you can, is, you know, is a very solid boundary of no contact, of not talking to that person. Which is really hard to do. But when you recognise that, you know, being somebody's narcissistic supply or being somebody's enabler for their bad behaviour is not only damaging you, it's damaging them. So really the kindest thing is to be cruel in that moment and cut contact with them. You know, and it's not always forever. You know, people do change. You know, if I didn't believe that people would change, then I wouldn't be a life coach. You know, it'd be a pointless endeavour. You know, of course people change. You know, of course they do. But, you know, words are cheap, actions speak. You know, narcissists will draw you back in time and time again, professing that they've changed. You know, and it's easy to say that. It's easy for me to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I just hit you, and then punch you in the face 10 minutes later and then go, oh, sorry for hitting you again. And to keep apologising. It's easy to apologise, you know. It's easy to apologise. What's difficult is changing. You know, is actually changing the behaviour. So if you've got somebody that, you know, continues to, you know, to display these behaviours over and over and over. See, it all came together in the end. You know, if you've got somebody who displays these things over and over and over, and they're saying that they're changing, they're saying that they're making the changes, but they're not actually changing. No, you need to just move away from that person, because they are toxic and they're abusive and they're using you and they're lying to you. And so, you know, change. You need to change. You know, the person who's being abused has got to change, because the abuser rarely will. And so, you know, what we need to do is put very strong boundaries in place. And by putting boundaries in place, we need to question why we're doing it. You know, what's the big why? Why are we putting these boundaries in place in the first place? And if you recognise that it's keeping you safe, that it's keeping people in your life safe, and it's also going to stop enabling the person who's damaging you, so that you can actually, you know, they can facilitate change in their life. If you recognise that you're doing that for that reason, instead of just being cruel and callous and, you know, getting rid of somebody from your life for whatever purpose, then you can start to instill that much easier. You know, and I think writing a list down of boundaries, of saying, you know, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, and sticking to it, and just stick to it, because if you don't stick to it, You know, it'll be you that gets damaged, and you teach people how to treat you, by your own behaviour. So if you have wavy boundaries and you allow people to do stuff that you say that you don't want them to do, that you will attract narcissists into your life, and you will attract bad people who are toxic that want to hurt you. And this is why we see people who have come out of abusive situations just keep falling into abusive situations after another, is because they don't have boundaries in place to stop them from doing that. So think about it, guys. Think about where you overcross your boundaries in your life, and consider where you can start to put boundaries in place, and think about why you